the most reliable way of getting in contact with us. But yeah, if people feel strongly about a different time or whatever, let us know. But at least so far, it seems like we're getting good turnout on Wednesdays, so on second Wednesdays. So we'll see. Definitely, we are always looking for more speakers. If you've got things you would like to talk about, please reach out. If you have never given a talk at a user group before, but would like to and have some ideas on something that you would be interested in presenting on, we also have several people who have quite a lot of experience doing presentations at groups, and so we would be happy to help get you bootstrapped into this world. I'm trying to think, is there any other boilerplate stuff we need for tonight? I think the other thing, well, tonight we're going to be talking about we're going to do a quick talk about what all was going on at Gophercon. I think we're going to do a chat about some of the new functionality in Go 123. We are definitely open to other topics. I definitely heard some ideas about wanting to see if we can get some open source contributions started, which is something we've done before when we were at Capital Factory, but it's been a while. So I think it would be a worthwhile discussion as well. But yeah, any questions or anything up front? Other announcements or anything that people wanted to make? All right. If not, want to come up and we'll do a quick chat about that.
No, not yet.
Go to whiteboard.
Yeah, there's a HDMI right there, and we have a bunch of adapters here now. Fix that in the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can move the podium or whatever. Yes. Yeah.
This is gonna be awkward. It doesn't show. Yeah.
It's getting there. Looks like
Warming up.
I need to adjust it here.
It definitely changed my view. Is there a plugin for that?
This one, yeah.
I'm gonna try this.
Give it a shot. Oh, there it is.
Wow, alright. Magic trick. Wow. Oh, it's
Well, they probably have
800 by 600, huh? No, the first one. Yeah, I just command mine. That's
okay.
not really.
Watch out.
So you go for Academy.
Okay. Well, I'm just using a blog post that we wrote from our company. But yeah, it's pretty much, we went to Gophercon, and so, I'm Samantha Coyle, I go by Sam, and I'm Cassandra Coyle, I go by Cassie, and yes, we're twins. Yeah, so they made it like the Diaphragm Digital Twins. We work at a company named Diaphragm. Yeah. But yes, we did go to Gophercon in Chicago recently, July, I think it was. Yes. So this is kind of like a recap of some of the things that we picked up, some of the like hot topics from the conference, and just kind of some general information on the conference. And just to kind of get a gauge, how many people have been to a Gophercon before? Okay. Just so we know kind of some areas. And hopefully we'll get those numbers up.
Yeah.
It is our favorite all-time conference. Yes.
Oh.
We've been to a few, and it's like you see the same people over and over again, and then you just become fast friends, and it's like a super welcoming group. So it's a really great like first-time conference if y'all have budget and want to go next year. But this year we had about 800 in-person attendees. It was a single track, and therefore like all the talks had a large audience. So like there's a photo
showing like the whole place was packed basically. So Gophercon in the past has had 2 tracks, so you have like the 2 different talks going on at the same time, but due to like COVID and everything, they've brought it down to 1 track. So it's kind of nice, more quaint, and yeah, about 800 people, but I'd say about, I don't even know, 5 years ago maybe, they had about 2,000. Like I think it was 2,300. Yeah, so it's still growing. And so, Sam and I help host meetups at the conference. So we hosted the Women Who Go meetup as well as the meetup for meetup organizers, because we help run the Women Who Go in the Austin, Texas area. And it's like a great opportunity for like diversity inclusion efforts and like, you know, getting to meet more people at a like more casual social setting.
Gophercon is like really big on helping like new attendees and very diverse profiles of people, and so I would say every night of the conference there is something to do and some sort of a meetup, just even outside of like company sponsored events where they're like pushing their stuff on you. So it's really nice from that perspective.
So like those were the 2 we hosted, but there's also like the Neurospicy, like neurodivergent group, and then there's like the Asian Alliance, and there's a few others like for a wider range of people. So it's really great.
And yeah, so this is the picture from the Women Who Go meetup. And also if you do go to Gophercon, like even if you're not necessarily like part of like the profile for like some of the different meetups, like you can still go because they also like foster allies and everything. So really nice from a social perspective and making connections.
And so my highlight this year was that I presented main stage to a packed room of about like 800 people, and so that is me speaking. They got a really great shot. I was really happy with it. I spoke kind of on the presentation I gave a time or 2 ago at this meetup, the standardizing errors work that I did in the Dapper project, actually with my coworkers.
You want to touch on it a little bit? And you could even bring up the error package if you'd like.
Well, I talked about it last time.
Sure, why not? Look at more people too.
Yeah. Okay.
You want me to use it?
Yeah. So the errors package is written using the builder pattern, and it's all open source. It's in the Dapper Kit repository. So if you want to be like more empathetic to your users and enrich your errors using like the richer error model, then this is a really great package to add error details, like well-defined error details to like, you know, be lenient to your users. And so yeah, here's the Dapper Kit repository. It's just a utility repo used. And then we implemented the errors interface, so it's just the error type. You don't have to manage like an additional type in your code. Like that was very important for us in Dapper because it's such a large code base to begin with. We don't want to manage an extra type. So kind of what it looks like is here. You have like a new builder, you pass in the relevant like gRPC, HTTP codes, a message, and then like a tag. So this is like us saying like, okay, pub sub is not found. This is a super simple example. Then you enrich the error with a specific error type of error info. And then we're enriching it with that resource info as well. And then you just simply call build to build the error with that builder pattern. So this was it. I had a whole 7-minute spiel about it. So Gophercon has 45-minute talks, 25-minute talks, and 7-minute lightning talks. And I did a lightning talk on this errors package and like the standardization we did, just to bring awareness to it, just because any one of you guys can use it, or girls. And for me personally, I knew I had a very large audience that I was not aware of until we were there. So I definitely, the whole day of my talk was like midday. So that whole morning, I just kept going over and over and over my talk. They typically have a room where speakers can go. It's like a quiet room where you can go and practice, like with each other or practice solo. So there's also that option if anyone's like interested in speaking.
Yeah, they definitely give you time to practice too if you want. So Gophercon's very accepting of like new speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so getting into some of the content, there were a lot of talks in Gophercon. I think it's 2 full days of presentations, and then there's also workshops that they had. I think one was on like debugging, and there's usually one on debugging, I say, every year.
Or Kubernetes
And Kubernetes, yeah. And you'll typically see like the same people giving those, Johnny B,
Joe Kennedy.
yeah. So these were some of the talks that we picked up on. Filippo is a really big guy in the cryptography space for Go. He's an ex-Googler who like went outside of Google, and he basically is like founding this company that will support open source maintainers. And so some of the efforts that him and that company, I don't remember what it's called, but his company is like working on is supporting the cryptography packages for Go. And so they're paid by all of these like really big companies. And one of the big things that he touched on was the introduction of these post-quantum algorithms into the Go standard library. So they're working to make it much more secure from here on forward. So that's in the crypto TLS package. They also touched on the map RAND package and how it was never really secure from like past Go versions, but it is from 122 on. And so in the Go packages, if you see the X prefix, it's typically like experimental. And so they had a lot of kind of not well-maintained packages under there, and some that were being used, and there was kind of just a lot of confusion when it came to packages under like X crypto blah blah blah. And so part of his company is like working to give more maintenance to some of those packages, like the crypto SSH package, as well as cleaning up and moving those and removing ones that are not going to be maintained moving forward.
I should probably point out, at least for the X crypto SSH, I suspect our talk next month is going to have a lot to do with that.
Oh, who's giving it? Oh,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
cool. Well, nice little spoilers.
Yeah, there was a recent talk at DEF CON on this subject.
Wow, cool. Good timing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, and I would say Gophercon, there's almost always like a crypto state of the union. So that was the updates from this year. There was also a talk on bubble T CLI, and I would also say the past Gophercons, there have been talks on some aspect of creating a CLI, command line interface. And so this year they talked about a TUI, which is a terminal UI, and it was on the bubble T package. And I think there's also like LibGloss is one of the like kind of sister packages under the hood that goes on there, so you can style your CLI applications and make them colorful and pretty. And so it's kind of interesting because like at our company we do use bubble T, and it's, I don't know, I think the package is like really good, but it's like more hands-on, and so the talk was on that. It was on bubble T. So if y'all are interested in that one, it was a habit tracker that she did.
Yeah. And all of the talks go on YouTube. If they're not there already, like you can definitely, or it will be there eventually. And there was a Go MQTT package from a guy in Africa. They like flew him in. It was really cool.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, Gophercon really likes, like really strong and like, no, like stories that make you feel really good. And so this one was the one that like made you feel really good. And yeah, he touched on how they use the Go MQTT package at his company, and they're like working to prevent poaching and
You had a
looking
lot of great photos from like the Savannah wildlife too, to like carry the story along.
So there was a bit on GoMPTT.
Oh, in my opinion, the best talk was the DAW package. It's a digital audio workstation. The speaker, I don't remember all the names, but he had the speakers connected and was running these programs, and it was like actually outputting all of this like musical noise. And so he was showing that you can make a song with this package.
And he was adjusting the pitch, and it was all through the DAW Go package.
And it was all live. He did not record any of it, so it was really great.
Yeah, so I wanna say, I mean, there were at least 3 live demos that I remember, and his was stellar. And it was like sound, whereas like some of the other ones had a few hiccups.
But if y'all are interested in like, and you have a musical information, it's a great package to check out.
And then there was a lightning talk on PG Test DB. Has anyone worked with Postgres database in Go? Me too. And yeah, so basically he touched on how it's like a lightning fast database that you can like spin up, it's ephemeral, and you can do a lot of really quick test things with it. So it's like PG Test database, and yeah, it was a lightning talk, so it was pretty much covering that. He did touch on how, typically when you think about maybe testing with Postgres, you'll work with test containers packages to spin up your test container for Postgres and interact with it. But he said this is much, much faster. So if CI speed is of consideration, PG Test database would be a good one. So Pronto GUI, there was, and I don't really think GUIs are like too common for topics for Gophercon, but this guy made this package, and it's a GUI with Go. I don't remember too much on it, because I think it's also like a topic. So almost there.
And then lastly, Andrew gave a talk. I think they presented at like the first Gophercon or 2, and so they brought him back to give a 10-year journey of Ngrok, and how like I guess all 24 hours they're like running their end-to-end tests so they can find like issues before hopefully their customers do, which we thought was interesting. And then it's really funny, he also talked about the error standardization they did at Ngrok, how users will like look up the error code, and she was like, oh, we did that too. Yeah. That, and then
Okay, so I published a textbook called Go Programming from Beginner to Professional.
oh yeah, that book
That textbook. And so, yeah, it was really neat because at Gophercon, they have a bunch of different events, and challenge series, for like coding challenges, and, so at several of the events, my textbook was like a raffle, prize, and, if you won the challenge series, then you got my textbook.
And the challenge series is kind of like a capture the flag. It is an event that goes on from like basically the start or like right before the conference starts throughout, and people will just like try to hack things. You get points based on accomplishing the tasks and whatnot, and so yeah, they raffled for both for that.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool because, like, I mean, I signed books for everyone who got one, and this is Martin.
Yes, from Nairobi.
Yes, and so that was another kind of new thing coming out, is like more and more people are having their own Gophercons, and so he's in charge of Gophercon Nairobi. So the first ever Gophercon to come to Africa, so that will be coming up, and he's taking a few of my books to raffle.
And then actually the individual Valentine that runs the Gophercon Singapore actually came in for Gophercon North America, and so we had 2 other like Gophercon orchestrators with us.
So these were the winners of the challenge series this year.
And then yeah, we left Gophercon. We can't recommend it enough. If you have like a first conference that you gotta go to, we definitely recommend it. We went as like diversity scholars like way internships that you can also apply for. Yep. Any questions?
Where is it gonna be next year? Do they have the
Oh,
announced yet?
they're
said-
wanting New York.
Oh.
Actually, it's not confirmed, but they wanna switch it up.
Okay, cool.
It was, I think there was like potential for Colorado, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking, they were like strong preference for New York.
I went to San Diego,
Yeah,
several years ago.
2019,
Training.
yeah, that's when we went.
Okay, yeah.
On the USS Midway.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they always have like closing parties at the end of it too, and it's like, it's not like super party where like everyone goes wild and whatnot, it's like you get these like, drink tickets and socialize, have fun, that kind of thing.
I think they did it in Denver, Colorado Springs or something.
That was like the first one.
Yeah.
And so this year was also the 10-year anniversary of Gophercon.
Oh, also, before we're done, it's really cool because the people that like wrote, like, go there. So like Russ, Cox always go, Robert, Rob Pike always goes, but I got to speak to Robert Graysomer.
Okay.
He was just sitting next to me and he was asking me about like why I love going to Gophercon so much and like why I love Go. And then I looked at his name badge and was like, oh, hello, like he's great intel for you, I guess.
He's the guy who's in charge of generics for Go.
Okay.
Ted Thompson over there?
He was there in 2019, but he did not talk. He just. Well, yeah, like he's, but I mean, I think he showed up to Rob Pike's talk and whatnot. Yeah,
Why did he not have his own talk?
He doesn't have to talk anymore.
Yeah, we're on the call for people review board, and so like submitting to Gophercon, if y'all ever wanted like helpful like
Feedback
Yeah.
before you submit, we're more than happy to help.
so like they always look for uniqueness of the topic. So that's where I said like, you know, each year you'll typically see like one CLI talk, like one test talk. So they try to diversify content, but also speakers. So you're not gonna see 10 million Googlers. So honestly, it's like, if you're thinking about like switching jobs and stuff, you wanna present constantly at Gophercon, you don't want to work at Google if you wanna keep presenting year after year after year.
Well, and then like the whole process is a double blind, so like, we don't, like, no one knows who submitted what, so there's that anonymity aspect. Okay, that's it. Thanks, y'all.
Alright. So I will post into the Slack. We've got new features of 1.3. Let me see. I think I can make this work. I have not tried this before. I'm going to try to present
From your
my
phone?
phone.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
Super high tech.
Alright.
Wait, from Android or what is that?
Yeah, it's the, it didn't work for a while there, but this is the,
Oh, the display port.
This is the 8. No, it's USB-C, but it's like, it's
So USB-C
Pixel 8.
out mode display port, right?
Well, yeah. Let's see, does it work? Does it work? If it doesn't, we've got other options.
I think usually there's a notification, and like in the notification you select like if you wanna do like the data or whatever. So try connecting it and see like if there's a notification saying that like you wanna charge or if you wanna use it as display.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. Did not charge the connected device. Oh,
Something
it was
changed.
there for a second.
Yeah.
Almost there.
Did it work at home when you tried it, or?
There it goes. Yay. Cool. Come on. It worked for a second. Just for a second.
Tease.
Wait, what if you try it in portrait mode? Like try to switch
Well,
the phone.
I'm gonna do that, but
So, not today.
like you saw it. Like it wasn't
Yes,
just me.
it was there.
Like it definitely happened, at least for a second there.
We have it recorded, so
Yeah.
it did happen.
Yeah. You can do it. Believe in you. Oh boy, no. Alright, we'll try it a different way. So anyways, we've got the, I posted into the Slack that, link if anyone is curious. So Go 123. We've got a lot of changes related to iterators. I'm sure that is probably somebody is going to find that controversial. I'm curious what the thoughts are on it. Anybody played with any of the new stuff from 123 yet?
Look at it. Work and everything.
I miss using Linux for my day job. That was fun.
Yes, sir.
Things just worked.
This came out yesterday.
123? Yeah, it's been within the last couple of days at least. I don't know. The days sometimes blur together.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Alright. We're not cooperating on this one either at the moment. Try this one. Worst case, we could try doing a screen share that thing.
Maybe the HDMI cable is like a little off.
Could be. We do have our own if we need it. Yep, something. Okay, settings. Okay. Displays. Okay. Alright. What is that saying?
It just touch the panel. How come both from each screen they actually have different things on them?
Is this the problem the whole time? Maybe that was the problem the whole time. Huh. about this. We should have checked this beforehand. It occurred to me that it wasn't gonna work right. Worked with my damn Linux box last week. That's fun.
Wait, do you have a Linux box? How do you use AirPlay
Well,
from
last time I did. No, that's a Mac.
Oh, that's a Mac.
Oh, there it is. Okay. No. Antone's Apple TV. What? Why is it black? Incoming connections blocked. Why you do this? Killing me, man.
How did Sam get it to work? How did you make it work?
Sorry.
With this.
How did you make-
glass here.
That's magic right there.
Yeah, yeah. It certainly seems it.
I had issues the last time too. I don't know how I got lucky this time.
We were in a different room last time, right?
I know, but it's just now 2 times that there have been issues.
We should blame Cisco, like all that stuff is done by Cisco.
Oh yeah, it's such a mess, man. Yeah, I am sorry about that. It is not cooperating.
Wait, so you never tried your HDMI cable, right? Do you want to try yours? You mentioned
Yeah,
about yours.
we'll try it. I mean, it was working a minute ago. But
Do
we'll
you
try
want to
it.
use my laptop?
If we need, yeah, we may end up resorting to that. Yeah, yeah. Let's see if we can get this. I was hoping we wouldn't need it. In case it is just the HDMI cable itself being funky.
I think some MacBooks actually have native HDMI. We try that as well.
Yeah. Oops, sorry. So that happened just as it was leaving my hand.
Wait, if it's like one of the latest MacBooks, doesn't it have native HDMI as well?
Yeah, you take out the
But
USBs.
that
There we are.
It doesn't work? What do you mean?
I'm telling you, this is the magic plug.
Okay.
There it is.
So maybe your cable was the thing that fixed it.
Well,
Oh, I mean, it was working a minute ago with hers, so I don't know what's going on.
do you want it full screen or are you gonna surf and turf?
Oh, well, surf is fine. Yeah.
Have at it.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's why let's come down on Slack. That's not
Yeah,
actually
I don't have
different
notifications.
diagram.
Next time I will definitely bring my Linux class. Last time it worked just fine. All right, so Go 123. So we've got quite a few changes to the language itself. We've got these all these different kind of iterator related things that have happened. So we've got our range of functions. So you can extend the behavior of a range command. So inside of a for loop or something like that. And so you have to go and implement these behaviors. This is like the generic style. And so you are implementing the iter. Let's pull up this specific one that I've got here that I shared.
I was going to ask.
So they're basically making it like a C++. Like, what's the point? What's the point of like having all the C++ features? Basically?
There was no point.
Yeah.
I get it out.
Because there were
Because like
already,
originally the whole idea of Golang and why they didn't have generics is because they wanted to make sure that the language is easy enough for everyone to understand. And like if you actually can redefine like all of those things, then like it stops being as easy as it used to be, right?
Well, I think that is the question of the balance that we're going for here. Is it, why are we adding generics at all? And I think there's the question. And I think the trick is if you think of it in that it gives you the kind of metaprogramming capabilities that you would have in like a functional language. There is value to these things. Being able to have like a high level patterns for data structures and things like that. And I think that is not something that was lost on the people that created Go. They knew that. They were very familiar with language design. And felt that it was not worth the added complexity, the added cost for being able to maintain backwards compatibility in the future. Because backwards compatibility, or forwards compatibility as it was, forwards compatibility for the language has been a priority from the early days of Go. They wanted it so that if you have Go code created now, you can compile it with just a later version of the Go compiler, and it will still do basically what you think. Oh.
To add on to that, Gophercon last year, Brazos did say, I don't think there will be like a Go like 2.0. It'll always be like 1 dot because they don't want to break the users.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I mean, they've kind of made that clear from the very beginning that was a high priority for them. So all you have to do is just change the compiler or whatever, and then you'll get your code compiled with the newest one. And so only very, very rarely used edge case stuff do they ever break forwards compatibility. And it's usually bugs that they didn't realize were there. It wasn't something they did on purpose ever that they were going to break. And so, but I think that is, if anything, to the point of trying to make it really simple so that when you look at the code, it's doing exactly what you expect. Being able to explain the distinction between user-created types, including ones created by libraries, and the native types, over time has become an increasingly high burden, I think, is my impression. So when you have to explain, why can you do why can't you have a map where the key is an integer and an integer happens to be implementing some interface that you've got, but you also have some struct that also implements that interface. And it's like, well, at a binary level, they're incompatible, and it's like, well, that's a really compelling argument for a dynamically typed language to behave like that, but this is a statically compiled language, so it's not really not really a concern in practice. Like, even if you were going to have to worry about things like CGO and your bindings and everything like that, you're already into territory where the binary optimization you get from using an integer versus a struct is kind of out the door already. And so then why make such a fuss about it? I think is kind of their I think the understanding from their perspective, this, from what I can tell. And so in that sense, it's being able to treat all of the types as if they are essentially the same is kind of what a lot of the work on generics was going for. And then that extends itself into other parts of the language, like range. Where you couldn't have done range in a way that made sense in every circumstance before. And I think that's part of both the promise and the danger of extending these things into Go is the same promise and danger we had with C++. With C++, they added, you could change all kinds of weird stuff, like you could change the meaning of dot, you could change the meaning of like basic operations and stuff on data types and do very confusing things, very unexpected things with just given the library. And so that's dangerous. But I think in C++, I feel like when they first introduced this, I know they spent a lot of time telling everybody about it, but I feel like they didn't think that was going to proliferate in the way that it did. Like, I think they thought it was going to be proliferate inside of a large code base at a company and not be an ubiquitous thing that gets kind of pushed onto people by creators of libraries so that you have this mishmash of incompatible syntactic looking things, which happens inside of C++. You know, and it's not that C++ is bad for introducing this. I don't think they could have reasonably anticipated just how off the wall some of this stuff would get, because no other language had done it to that extreme. You know, Ruby has that capability as well, where you can change like functionality of the language almost, like it's not literally, but it kind of feels like it as a programmer. Because, and I don't think Ruby had this problem because so much more about Ruby is we all agree for the one standard way we do things. Like consensus of how things happen is a thing in Ruby in a way that it is not in some other languages. Go does have an advantage in that it has a lot more of that in some languages. You know, Go format is like a thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Just like add on to that idea. Like the reason why I like Go, or I still like Go, is that generally there's only one way of doing things. And that makes code very readable. And I think this was one of people's maybe concerns about when adding generics, is it adds this ability of an explosion, as you say, to the language. You add all this nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly see the want for this range, and you can come up with a bazillion other things to also add. This was one of the critiques of generics. Now, I don't buy generics. I think generics are fine. I use generics. They're okay. There are use cases to them, and it's nice when they're used nicely. But it does open this window, allowing you to do something in more than one way. And that is, I think, where things become difficult, and where you get this mix of style and unexpectedness, which is the kind of death of the programmer. This kind of when you see something that's unexpected, and then your brain melts. It hurts productivity, it hurts testing, it hurts understanding what we're doing. Yeah, it does give me pause to see this being added, not for the thing itself, but for what it means in the future. And as you say, the kind of what C++ turned into.
Yeah.
And Ruby on Rails and the rest of it. Yeah.
I guess the idea of different dialects in the same programming language can be disorienting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would argue, I think in the whole ecosystem, it may have actually simplified both the cases of generics and range over function, because before generics, you wanted homogeneous containers, you did CodeGen, or you did empty interface, and there were lots of different ways to do it, nobody agreed on them. Same thing with iterators, there were lots of different iterators, even in the standard library. And so I think they, and with generics, they said from day one, we might actually do generics. It's really hard because we have these things called interfaces, and they fight with each other. So we're not going to do it till we can make them play nice. And once they did, I think they did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been this explosion of horrible generic stuff. I mean, I would argue channels, it was worse because people said, oh, channels, and that was built in the language to start.
Yep.
So I think if you're talking about just the language itself, it has added a little bit of complexity, but the tentacles that were growing out into the environment because of the way the language was, code gen with lots of different iterators types, I think they actually did a good job of saying, let's add reasonable features to get everybody to where they can be on the same page.
Yeah. And in defense of even a language like C++, that is part of the reason why they've added some of the functionality they have it. You know, things like auto types and whatnot. That people were doing that anyways, and weird preprocessor stuff. And so then it's like, well, okay, instead of trying to write a reverse compiler for your own code in the C preprocessor to predict what's the type gonna be, like, let's just have.
Wait, is it actually possible to implement the auto type in a preprocessor?
People
I
do
have-
lots of blackmail.
I have seen it tried. I don't. Possible is a very strong question there. Have I seen someone attempt it? Yes. I don't know that I've seen someone succeed.
But
I have seen someone attempt it.
It
yeah.
would be production code. I mean, it would be like a
Oh,
looks like a
I
product.
wouldn't use that code in production. But, like, it was a fascinating thing to see. Like, yeah. So
Is there like a talk about that somewhere?
I mean, I think that falls into the embarrassment category. Like, but no, I mean, like, yeah, I think there is something to be said for Go in a way like Ruby, where it has this notion of like, here is how we write the language. And you hear a lot how, you know, Python has this to an extent, like Pythonic, everything, you know, you should do things in a Pythonic way. I think they've lost that battle. I think Ruby, surprisingly, has won that battle, even though they've given you a lot of foot guns in Ruby. That community is pretty good about, like, libraries that become popular are usually in line conceptually with the broader community. I think we have yet to see if that's going to happen with Go in the long term. And things like this could be a risk to that. On the flip side, to your point, well, this functionality is being added because maybe we were already diverging from it. We were already getting to a situation where attempts to work around the language were leading people into different directions. And so by giving you a way to do it in the language, then we try to cut off some of this surprise.
So I think initially they had this thing where they weren't planning to add anything to the language unless all the three authors agree that like that should be added to the language. So has that basically changed? Like they no longer require like the overwhelming majority of like whether the authors are to add stuff to the language, or like how does it work now?
I mean, I'm not sure that they would have disagreed with any one of the things yet. I think you were absolutely right that is the concern that they would have in the long run. That like where it could go wrong. But I think in the question, the narrowly defined question of is this wrong to add to the language as it exists today, assuming that that there are no knock-on implications from us doing this. There's a lot of things that they refused to do in the past for that reason. And one of those things was they didn't add generics before they solved all these problems. There were several proposals that had been made to add generics, and they didn't go with any of them because each of those was going to cause problems to the language in C2. Not even a question of like what are the long-term implications, but it was going to have problems with the language as it exists. And so they didn't want to go forward until they had that solved. Now, in this case, we'll see. I think you know, in the question of like, does this break the language? If we pretended like there were no libraries at all and all code was written from scratch in Go all the time, does the introduction of this break the language? And I don't think so. Other people could disagree with that, but I think that's one of the problems is all of the previous examples of generics. Someone would have said that the way you did that broke the language until we got the one we did. And there were still people who felt that the introduction of generics, the way they did it, was wrong. So
I think range was already polymorphic because it could take channels or
Yeah.
slices or whatever, so it's
Yeah,
just
it's already
adding one more type. I don't think it's that dramatic of a language change. It's not a bolted on, horror that some people seem to think it. That's just my opinion.
When it comes to generics, I've only seen and heard of the pros. What are the actual cons that you guys talk about?
The cons of generics.
It's a little bit more difficult to read, but I think
Yeah.
in both this and the iterator's case, I think what you're going to see predominantly is someone writes a library that does that stuff, and then you just use the library.
I
And
mean-
you don't really see much of it, and it's fine.
I think to his point as well, the introduction of generics opens the door to a lot of very different ways to approach things in Go. Where, that's the thing, one of the things that generic gives you is a lot of functional programming capabilities. And so now, if you ran into a code base that was making very heavy use of functional programming ideas, and you were someone who did not come from a functional programming background, you were going to be completely lost. Even though this is Go code on paper, this is supposedly Go code, you're going to have no idea what is happening. Like you might not even recognize large chunks of the syntax. Like you don't even know how things are being put together. That is a real danger when you're dealing with cross paradigm stuff like that, which is both the positive and the negative of some of these languages like C++ that lean into the multi-paradigm stuff. Like at this point, C++ is absolutely a procedural language, an imperative language. It's a functional language. It's an object-oriented language. It is all of those things for sure, and more.
Templates are Turing complete.
Yeah, and
Just story.
Yeah,
That's all
yeah.
you need to know.
There are modified versions of the preprocessor which are Turing complete. The standard one isn't, but intentionally. But yeah, the introduction of these things, they give you, really great things you can do with them. But at the same time, by introducing this more capabilities, you're also introducing new places to break. One of the people who's kind of a strong influence on the Go community, Brian Kernighan, he kind of takes this approach to languages should be very, very small. And I think when you look at the languages that he was involved with, like almost all of those small languages that he was involved with are still being used actively today. And this is decades later. And there aren't very many contemporaries of those languages which are still being used. And maybe there's a reason. So we've got a couple different, yeah. But go ahead.
Aren't generics just the same thing as interfaces?
No.
Just right into the primitive types?
Well, okay, you can, that is one of the things that you get from generics, is that you can start using primitive types in places where interfaces could have only been used before. That is true. But there's straight interfaces. If someone wants to give that talk, I am excited to see that talk, but that is a hour and a half long talk all by itself.
And what does Brian Kernighan, what does he think of generics? Like, did he approve that, or was he kind of like left out of that, or what happened?
I don't think he had a strong. I don't remember hearing anything about him weighing in on that. I think. I don't think Brian Kernighan thinks of Go as being one of his programming languages that he had like a huge. He had an influence on it, but indirectly. It's not like awk, where he's the K in awk. It's not like C, where, as he would very quickly point out, he did not write C. But it's also the reality of like we were still kind of writing C when he helped to write that book, and so then they changed the way that C works because of his input.
I thought he wrote like the Go programming language book, and like he's
Yeah.
one of the authors of the language itself.
I don't think of the language itself.
Just
Just the book. And I think it was because he's worked with all those folks behind the language for so long that they asked him to, if you're gonna go get someone to write your book, Kernahan would be at the top of the list, and then Tim O'Reilly might be number 2. It was if you're looking for like celebrity, documentation writers. I don't know if that's a thing, but if it is, those are the 2 people in that really, really bizarre, weird little circle. So, yeah. You don't see very many other people get excited when they get to the bottom of the man page and they're like, oh look, not usually. I mean sometimes, but it has happened to me once before. It actually has happened to me on multiple occasions. I was looking through some code bases and just happened to be reading something down in the guts of the Debian system and saw like, oh, Shuttleworth wrote this like when he was in college. Like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Like before thought and everything. And then another time I saw Julian Assange had written a couple of the man pages that are still inside of Debian, because of course, like that's how we got into all that stuff. So yeah. So you never know. Do we want to go through some of these? We got about 15 minutes or so. Or do we want to, despite all the struggles with the HDMI, do we want to talk about some ideas for open source contribution stuff? What do you guys want to do? Well, let's split it in half and half. We'll do a few more minutes of looking through the particulars here, and then we'll talk about that. So the particular changes that came into 123, a lot of them relate to iterators, and this is all the stuff that we were discussing, kind of the extensions of the ideas behind your generics. So you can now implement range functions. So this is an example of what it would look like before 123. You would do something like this for a synchronous map implementation. In 122, you would call it like this. You would pass in your range function. It gets applied in this fashion. For 123, it's just built into the map type, so you didn't have to invent a range function every time you wanted to range over a map in an obvious way. So it solves a lot of those kinds of things. Here are the different types that that range can run over.
So it does pass K, KB with range. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking it only passes the full.
Yeah, so the iterator types, you've got your single argument sequence and then your 2 argument sequence. Yeah. So this is a function which returns an iterator here. And then one that consumes it. So it's way simpler at this point. So you're just ranging over S. You were given some kind of a custom type and then handle all that stuff for you. Okay. This is probably the part where it starts to get off the rails in some regards. Instead of just the push iterators, now we have pull iterators, which is, in fairness, one of the places where things can go sideways inside of Python. When you're changing what is happening with the iterator, so you've got your next and your stop, so you just keep going next. So now it is, your iterator itself is now, it's not like a iterator generator, if you will. It's like an iterator instance for people who are usually object-oriented languages that may be familiar with some of that distinction there. So you've got that kind of functionality. The slice ones, I think, is maybe a little bit less surprising given the other two.
Question about the pools.
Yeah.
That would be useful for channels. No.
Well,
If you
channels
encapsulate-
already does solve it. Already does work with range. But yes, something like that. You could.
Oh, you can encapsulate it without passing the channel.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can have. And there's another complexity.
Yes, and I think that is precisely the fear. Is once you start to cross that bridge, now you could be getting into some code that would be genuinely surprising to a new developer. Even one who's very comfortable with channels, very comfortable with the concept of iterators, you could make a pattern in a library that then would be nearly impossible to figure out what is happening when you look at this. And then you have a giant piece of code written in that dialect of Go, and it's going to be very difficult to understand what's going on in that. That's part of the danger. But if it's used sparingly, which maybe was the argument that they've made in C++ as well, if it's used sparingly, it's fine. The examples in the textbook was from C++ were all fine. Those were all okay. Like, it's once they started using it for weird stuff that it didn't make any sense anymore. But the things in their examples, that was all fine, Like, plus means something different. Like, oh, that's not fair. It's like, okay, you just use plus on two strings. That is not a thing that makes sense in C. It's not even a thing that makes sense natively in C++, but it is a thing that makes a lot of sense if your strings are, if you're imposing like a notion of like a mutable string types, then using the plus sign will do something that makes sense. And so the argument in C++ is reasonable. Or you got like two matrices and you're adding them. Well, it's not like that. It's like, well, it could be. Like that's the way they think about it, so that's okay. It's once you start getting into things like, when I do plus, it actually multiplies the second number by 7 and then subtracts 3. That's what plus does. And it's like, I didn't see that coming. But, oh, well, that's because it's my special type of integer. Like, oh, man. That's the danger. And now, going through C++ libraries, that stuff's everywhere. And so that's the fear that that's going to happen in Go. So we've got your iterators talking about other high-level operations you can perform, maybe sorting. Your map iterators where you can choose the orders, the key value pairs, all that kind of stuff. This one I think is a pretty good simple change, a really nice one. The default behavior of time.after. So what happens is when you run time.after, so it's the garbage collector goes and creates, not the garbage, the allocator goes and creates an object of this type, the time.after, whatever the internal type is of that. Okay, it creates an instance of this, and it is lexically scoped. But of course, remember, we're talking about a select here. So the select is not a lexical scope. The for is, but the select is not. And so if it's not in a big hurry to go clean this thing up, oh well, it's not in a big hurry because like inside of the guts of time.after, we're depending on this object so that we know when to do the callback once the real-time clock calls it, so we can't garbage collect it yet. So you got through your for loop here over and over again. This thing is a fork bomb because of the time after here. Because every time you iterate through this loop, it's going to go make a new one and wait for an hour, and you're going to eat up all of the memory in the entire system before you get to the end of the hour. So one of the changes in 123, well, they kind of go through here and explain it, but one of the changes that happens is that this thing, if it's a time.after, it decides that its lexical scope is going to be slightly different, which is an annoying thing, I'm sure, for the compilers folks to deal with. But I think this is one of those circumstances that, you know what, let's make a special exception here. like the fact that in order to have a working system in 122 that wasn't going to eat up all the memory in your entire computer, that you had to switch from this reasonable, elegant code to this like weird deferred cancel monstrosity just because you had a time.after with an hour in it. Yeah, they're like, no, we're just gonna, if it gets to the end of an interior notion of a lexical scope, so a for loop, then that is enough to make, and that's the only thing holding it. So if something else is holding it, okay. But in a sense, they're just treating it so that the internal guts of the time.after system is not going to count as the number of things holding on to something for the garbage collector. That's essentially what the change they made. So when you get through here, you get to the end of the for loop, it's only keeping on to the old one because the mechanism that calls the time.after had to have a copy of it. And if that was the reason it did garbage collect, then yeah, that's what's going to kill your method. So I think it's a good, that is a good change, I think. Like, even though it's kind of weird, it's going to be weird for the compiler to do things in a slightly different way for a library like that. This might not be the only one they do that way too. Like maybe for things like reading off of like a pipe or something like that. Maybe there would be circumstances like that as well, where there's things where you're interacting with the system itself, where we're like, no, like, yeah, I know there's more stuff going on in the background inside of your library, but like, if we got to the end of an infinite for loop, then no, your old copy's going away. They also made a slight modification to the stop and reset behavior inside of time as well. It's kind of interesting. You can go through the specifics if you're curious. Yeah. Canonical values. Those of you who've dealt with Java might be getting a little bit of PTSD with this particular one, but yeah. Guaranteed unique items. An interesting thing to play around with. Some HTTP cookie stuff. I haven't gone through all the details on some of this stuff yet. I figure I'll probably go later. But anybody have any insight into any of these particular changes yet?
What was the new approach in 1.23 time.after? Did they mention that lexical code again?
Do the what?
Did they mention the lexical analysis for after implementing the time.after?
Oh, in this particular blog post was just they kind of do a high level just overview of what the changes were, and explaining why these changes were happening the way they were. But no, they didn't go too deep into the nature of just the results, the net results that it was making, like eating up memory just to have things sitting around waiting for an hour when there was no way the thing that they were waiting on was going to take an hour. And so inside of an infinite for loop, it's going to eat up a lot of memory quickly.
Yeah, I think we were discussing it on one debatable topic about generic. I just want to know, in real time, when you say eventually, in your current project, is there any cases are you guys using any generic anywhere in Golang.
Yeah, who's using generics as part of your job? Or, yeah, over there.
Yep.
Where do you use it?
When I have some logic that I need to do over some generic types, I suppose.
No,
Yeah.
I just want to analyze the scenarios because whenever we
Yeah.
have a common type, we use the interface and all those things, right?
Yeah.
And I know the generic when we come to C# or Java where we want to build that student as a generic,
So-
when we can build that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So in Go, we have a tier, if you have any type implicitly, we were using it, right? But I don't find any real time scenario.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah, we are
So this is
using
my
that
approach
one.
to generics is you should only ever use them when you really need to use them. And kind of generally avoid them as much as possible until it actually makes sense to use them. Just because the feature set of generics in Go is, I think, personally, correctly very well scoped. You can't go crazy with them by design. So unless you really need them or it really makes sense, I wouldn't kind of go near them. Where I use them specifically is I work on Dapper, which is an open source project in Go. And we have different resource types, and they need to be hot reloaded. And so there's some reconciliation logic and some data check logic and all these kind of things, which is just a bunch of loops and a bunch of logic that happens over a set number of types. And it was interesting to use generics there because over time, as we add more types to Antone reloading, it's very easy to add a new type, and it's very easy to test all these things because the logic doesn't change. So in that specific case, it makes sense to use generics.
Good to know,
Yes.
thank you.
But yes, again, avoid them. Generally.
So,
Unless
I never used them in a production environment because by the time I was when I was last doing Go as part of my everyday work, generics had not been built into the language yet at that time. The one that they eventually adopted and was being discussed at that time. But some of the places where we were looking at it were things like search functions, sort functions, so really basic things like that.
Yeah. Sorry, and
Yeah.
that is the other place. Sorry, I should be
Yeah.
specific as well. So there's that, which is kind of maybe a more larger kind of package, like actually larger thing. The other case is like very small utility functions where, like, you have like a sort function or a queue. We use queue, so we have a queue package. That's generic, and that makes sense to add it there. Small utility functions also make sense. Yeah.
There's a library called Fuego that I think uses generics pretty well so far, where you can declare the type for the request body and it does the binding for you. Felt like a good place for it.
And what is that one?
Quite.
Yeah, Fuego.
Yeah, so like, I think to me that's at least the places in the past when I was doing Go where I thought, well, generics would have been better than even having interfaces in this particular instance. It was always things where it was like just a little bit of functional programming would go a really long ways to make this problem a lot easier. And examples of that are like, at least the way that I think about, I'm just like a CS guy, the way I think about sorting, the way I think about searching are functional programming problems, where it's like, here's a list, now give it back to me in a sorted fashion. That as a high level concept, that's a functional programming idea. Now, it's one that's so pervasive it's made it into every other language, but that kind of concept where you think of, oh, I have an entire chunk, it has one property, I want to different property, and search is another one of those things where you're like, I want to get an index of a thing in this list. It's like, well, just give me index 1. It's like, well, I want the one that's the most blank, whatever blank is, like the biggest integer. Okay, well that's kind of like sorting, but maybe it's like I want to know the one where the distance between these two values inside of this struct are the smallest or the biggest or something like that. And you can do every one of these things by some other means. Or you can save yourself a whole lot of code if you have something like a functional programming way of approaching that particular thing. But that's the problem, is you want to be sparing of that. Because most of the people writing Go code are not, like, they don't do functional programming. And so, well, if it was literally, here's a list, I'm going to go sort it, that's not going to throw almost any good programmers off. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, I get that. It's when you get into something a lot more complicated, where you're like, okay, we're going to pass in, like, lambdas that return other lambdas 5 layers deep, and then from that, we're going to manipulate things and, like, okay, what? No, don't do that. Like, that is going to trip up everyone else. You know, it starts to look like Perl, the write once, read never, you know.
So we have one particular use case for generics for matching the interface of a common library. Basically, we have cases where different libraries may return different types, but we want common abstraction sits on top of that and do a little bit in addition to the return value. One problem is, like, 9 out of 10 packages we use return one type, like say integer. 1 out of the 10 libraries return string. And you cannot say we want to create an interface accept any because it won't match. But instead, when we can do it as generic, it could be string or int, then in generic, you can actually match either, because when you run, you can just declare as either string or integer at the time. So you don't actually, it solves the problem, because we actually trying to jump all different hoops on how can we run one interface to match all these. Before generic, we actually couldn't do it. And with generic, we actually can put constraints as string or int or string, and then it will match either one because it means one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is one of the places where it can be useful. I mean, even in a more generic place where that kind of thing would happen would be like testing. If you're like, I have some complex data type which I want to do something with in runtime, but I know this like high level thing I'm wanting to do with it, which is fine. I can do that with interfaces at runtime, but like it feels like a waste of time to be creating a struct with literally just an integer in there, just to make the testing code look a little bit closer, and it's like you're not actually helping readability that much at that point. And so that is one of the places where it's tempting to use generics. Now, of course, is that a good enough reason to use generics? I don't know. I don't know that it is, but
testing code is always earlier than production.
Yeah, this is true.
Well, this is just off the top of my head. I may be completely on base here, but a way to think about it maybe is that if you have multiple types, the Venn diagram of what those types are like is small, but you care about that small intersection.
Yeah.
That may be a good, heuristic for a way to do it.
Well, I think that's, and to kind of get exactly to that point, pulling out my formal methods hammer here again. When the only thing you want to care about is when literally are the types the same at all? Like, I don't even care what they are. I literally don't care. All I care about is, are they the same type? Now, the similarities have dropped all the way to 0. All I care about is the equivalence of them. I don't care if they are, comparable, even in a binary sense. And so then at that point, well, how do you do that? And in Go, it has better options than a lot of languages did, in that you could just use an empty interface. And so as long are out of time, but definitely, it sounds like we've got some interest in the possibility of exploring some open source work in the future. If there's folks who are interested in this, please reach out. Let's get the conversation going. We've definitely done we tried a bug squash-a-thon. I don't know how much success we had in that one, but we did do a documentation thing, and one time we did some improvements to Kubernetes. Now, this is a very different era, so improvements to Kubernetes were like fish in a barrel at the time. Like I don't know if everyone remembers. There was a while where Kubernetes was like the example of the worst possible Go code base you could look at. It was awful. It was really awful for a while.
You found it on the bus batch?
What?
You did the bus
Yeah, we did it. Yeah, at one point. Yeah, but it has improved dramatically in recent years. So it used to be really good. Like it was. Docker was a decent code base, not great, but it was decent. Kubernetes was for a while, but it is improved, and that's why we have open source. Is because even something that like the code base starts off like what is happening here, like what is going on, you know, Linus's law wins. With enough eyeballs, you know, all the bugs are shallow. It will eventually get better. It's like Wikipedia in the early days was not the best, but it got a lot better over time. So, well, thank you all for coming out, and we will see you next month.
Definitely. And how do you want to start on that open source thing? And do you have any tools to connect with that one?
If you can get into the Slack, that would be a good one. Otherwise, just
Gophercon?
you go for Slack. If you just Google for
Yeah, it is for us.
if you just look for pound ATX.
Okay. Definitely I'll connect with that one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and thank you to Cassie and Sam.
Where at?
I'm sorry, next to the I gave it.
It's still all right?
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully it goes well, right?
Thank you.
Guys, Sam needed the book. I just don't get the talk. Usually,
Yeah.
she usually doesn't.
And that's the thing, is like this thing is brand new, so it should be working, but like next year having so much trouble.
Very small.
Tuesday,
We do a lot, it's all like very complex, like fun.
Maybe I'll do it when I'm back.
You're
saying generics and do that.
Second?
What do you want to try and go over?
So great responsibility. Great.
No.
Great responsibility. Inspiringly. Then you turn a code base into a great.
Yes.
But like, not that big.
Oh, no.
Because once you start using generics, kind of get yourself
Be interested in knowing like what other people think.
Yeah, definitely share a link inside the ATX.
Not readable code.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Because if I look at code, there's like just some random if statement, and there's like computation or weird stuff.
Yeah, sure,
And there's no explanation for why it's there. And I don't know what those values do at all. And I'm like, what is it?
Yeah. And that's
Find out that there is a reason why.
why not a split function.
Yeah, so actually, they're both.
Oh, yeah.
We're all
If I see that in my code, I can see the type. great, but like that doesn't actually tell me what's happening under the hood. So
But that's why I think if it really makes a difference and it makes everything else better, you squeeze it down to where it's small enough to where you're okay. You're being
To me, both Slack and Discord are like, we've already lost
Don't let it
that.
affect
IRC, I'm all for.
What's gonna be
Like, I'm for IRC. Zulip, I'm okay, but like, Slack and Discord to me are like a half inch above.
It's not really
Facebook
more
channel.
I think, like you said.
Like, at that point, you've already lost the war.
Although I don't know that generics necessarily.
So another link to share with your group, but we could potentially do a bridge or
This is
something.
definitely a functional
Well,
feeling
does
thing
Discord
that kind of
kind of
adds to me. It's kind of a higher order thing rather than
no, they don't
purely
really
functional, no
no
side
IRC.
effects.
So that's
it's a
a
small
small
bit
bit
of
of
Go
Go
or
No, like a translation to chat systems.
I didn't.
No, what do you
That was a really common thing with IRC.
Well, I think,
as other
like I
systems
said,
try to
the language itself, I don't think we have a problem with.
Yeah.
In fact, there's people, including people who were in the standard library for Go.
They all
They
came to
were, well,
IRC.
that's not a problem, they were already creating various types of iterable that look different and use different
Right.
Which speak bridges.
And the nice thing about this is you can still have those there, and you can just put this little wrapper around it.
Yeah, so if a message comes
You
in,
can still use the old
not
interface,
IRC,
you don't have it's about as good as you could.
It's like one
Yeah.
person now.
We can make it. Sure. Just hope there's not too many people there.
Well, and also
They,
it's like,
smoke
if
cuts.
you're bringing in the cases, okay, this 123,
After that, you take the price drop. It's a number.
it'll be fun.
Source. I
How you
think
can't
along
even go
with like
compare.
generics, I think people were
Have you?
afraid about it's gonna be awful. But
I
it hasn't
had a
been,
couple of
at least in
jobs
my experience.
where we used
Honestly, at
Golang.
Gophercon, it was like the wild, wild west where
Yeah.
people were like, I don't know how to use generics
Yeah.
properly,
No,
and that's
it's
the
not
gist,
like
no
remotely.
one.
Alright.
Well, and Robert,
Well, it's good to meet you. Yeah. See you next time.
talks on generics.
I don't have any Golang.
So it's like you couldn't even get insights from the person who wrote it.
Well, that's why I think, again.
Are we still being recorded?
I don't
take-
know.
Have you had the longer that included?
I glanced at it. Yeah, I have a hard time with like the single
The variables with the single letter thing.
The
The
T's
generic
and K's.
code.
Yeah, T's and K's,
The
yeah.
generic code,
Just what
yeah.
makes it.
you know. But I'm not writing it myself.
Yeah, but I think people who use generic libraries that aren't doing the generics directly, it's just kind of there.
That's quite intuitive
I
too.
think that's
Yeah.
fine. Same thing with the iterators, I think it'll be like that for the most part.
You put Q for the type of string, that's like,
Well,
that makes sense.
In fairness, same thing can be said with C++, and look where that got us.
Well, but I think that's a big
'Cause who's-
cultural
Like, how
difference.
many people do, outside of really large code bases, how many people do generics in their own C++ code, other than what's given to you by libraries? Like, it's
Well, but I mean,
rare.
you just look at this, look at the error messages from the standard
Oh,
library.
right, right, that
Plus
was
the
the-
blah, blah, blah,
Like
allocated,
the-
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Well,
I think we're
to
actually
me,
doing a lot
of generics.
yeah, to me, C#
I don't know how to-
and Java are
Oh, it's like
basically,
saved on
they're,
YouTube?
Yeah,
they're
it's like-
so similar, and the
Oh,
good and the bad.
Yeah.
You can Google.
There are notable differences in that Java is running on JVM, C# compiles down to
Apple
actual,
Packing, they automatically,
you know,
But that's
robust
because
code.
unlike Go, you don't
all the
have
events
your
that they have.
interfaces
So, you know,
don't
like,
work the same way.
advances like in
Yeah,
WinFront,
in either C# or Java, but they're very similar between those two
So,
languages.
I was always like, why have generics in
Well-
Go? It's not needed, because you have the
So
interface.
that's like the camera.
But
Well,
if you wanna have-
it's once you start looking at integers, it's once you start looking at.
I wanted to.
My big thing, the first thing I thought of was homogeneous containers. Can't do that with interfaces.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to pitch in, because you were asking, it's like, when should you use one over the other, but it's like interfaces are for like defining behavior, a set of behavior.
Yeah.
Whereas it's different than like the principles of working with generics and generic types, where you're defining like type constraints, or working with like the same logic.
Well, so Java, C# background,
Okay, oh, okay.
you use generics because you need that behavior, because there's no interfaces in Go don't work like interfaces in C#.
Okay.
Where everything that has those predefined methods is always that type of interface, right? In Go.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, the duck typing thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
Yeah,
not the
structural
case in,
typing, yeah.
which is not the case in Java or
So-
C#.
When they say they're gonna add generics to Go, I was like, it's so weird, cause like you don't need it. Like, it's not, only for primitive types.
Yeah.
Well, not even
I mean,
just for
that's-
primitive types, if you want.
I can see the case for primitive types, comparable. Anything comparable
well,
or.
but-
Well, the synchronous
Yeah.
map,
Floats
it's in the
and
standard
methods.
library, and by the way,
Yeah.
you shouldn't use that a lot anyway, but synchronous map, it uses interfaces, and it would probably be more type safe and better if you use generics.
Yeah.
Because
yeah,
you just have a container of some type, you don't care what type it is, as long as you go with the container.
Yeah, you
That's
care,
better
you
than
care about
generics.
whether the two types coming in and out are the same or not.
Right.
That's an important thing. That you can't
Because
get lost
you
in
can
the
just
types.
put anything in it.
Yeah, it's an invariant that takes care of
It gets
itself.
interface back.
If it's interfaces, you have to do that invariance
Yeah.
validation.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get you.
Yeah,
That's, I'm sorry.
Nah, you're good, you're good.
But I think, like I said, channels kind of blew up and people said, oh, channels synchronize, therefore anything that needs to be synchronized, I'm gonna use channels.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then people realize, wait a minute, mutex will do this just fine, and a lot of people switch back to using mutex.
What do you mean synchronize?
So a lot of people were saying, oh, by the way channels works, I can have two Go routines shoving things into them, and it will synchronize itself.
Yeah.
So people were using channels to say like, let's shove a thing out, pull a thing out on the other side, and all you have to do is say, lock it, do something on it. So there was a prevalence of channels that were, synchronization was needed, but not all the other stuff that channels do. And I think there was a big thing at the beginning of channels where people were just using for that limited functionality, when you didn't need all the other stuff that channels do. And then there was kind of a backing off later where people said, well, all I have to do is block a mutex.
We got some more cheese.
And I think that may be the case, even if things kind of look like they're going off the rails. I think Go culturally, I just picture Rob Pike sitting on my shoulder saying, little bitty tiny Rob Pike saying, no, don't do that.
Or Ron Evans with the little tiny girl.
I think it'll be. I've followed Go since it was announced, and I think it has done a better job of staying a good language than any other language that I've watched.
Even with the generics?
Over that period. Yes. What have you seen out there that's like, oh my god, this is so bad because of generics? What have you used that sucked because of generics?
Well, like the nice thing about Golang is that like basically the whole language is outlined in the Go programming language book, right, by the Freddie.
More
and it's like a
importantly-
200-page book. It's like a 50-page book, and it literally describes the whole language, right? Yeah. And the other way where you can see the language is the spec for Golang, right, which is only like the whole. It's like a single dot, right?
Anyone?
Oh,
So
yes, I
the
need
spec
cookies.
is a little bit
Does it
denser,
always
but
come
it's
at the
still
end?
readable.
How do it connect?
It's
Yes,
like
it
the only
does.
language spec.
Unfortunately, someone
It's
reading that
readable.
for everyone, so.
And yes, it's a little more complicated now, but it's not. And I think you might have stepped out when I said it, but from day one,
Thank you.
from day one, they said, you know what, we're open to generic.
So it's a flat rate of $8.
From day one, they said, we're open to generics.
Okay.
We would like
Which
to
is
do them
honestly
if
a
it
pretty
makes
good
sense,
discount,
but
really
only if we can do it.
$3.25 every
And they
20
waited
per
until
I think I
they
remember that.
So,
Yeah, they're not kidding around.
No, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, people may disagree, but
So I think you have to exit at 10, right? And you have to enter after 5. That's now the rule, right?
Exit after 10 or before?
No, before 10.
Before 10.
I'm not staying.
Yeah, they're trying to keep you here.
Before.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the talk.
Y'all come by in a bit, I just have to give you.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I might reach out about that generic con.
Yeah? Are you one of the other?
Sure.
Are you subscribing?
Okay,
Volunteering?
cool.
You're volunteering?
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
It's the best way to learn it.
Let's get that in writing, man.
It's recorded, it's
That's it,
recorded.
yeah.
Alright.
Step one.
Get the life outside.